Breaking news from an Iran protest happening right now in West LA. Air 7 was overhead right when a large crowd got going after someone into a U-Haul. Now, to put some context to this entire situation, there was a planned protest for 2 o'clock this afternoon outside the federal building in Westwood. That protest was called Anti-Iranian Regime Rally. Well, about 3:30 this afternoon, just as Air 7 flew over this protest to kind of get eyes on what was happening, this is what happened. That U-Haul drove through a very large crowd of protesters. It's difficult to tell how many people. We are told by LAPD nobody was injured in this, but you can see this quickly became a very, very tense situation. There was a driver inside that U-Haul. You can see him interacting with protesters who are jabbing flagpoles and all sorts of objects through the window at him. What you cannot see in this video on the other side of that U-Haul.
Okay, so this just happened and it's absolutely...
The room didn't erupt. It froze. That's what witnesses described first. Not the yelling, not the pointing, not the threats. But the moment the oxygen seemed to vanish from a federal courtroom as a sitting president crossed a line most defendants never even approach. Not policy, not politics. Power, naked and unrestrained, colliding head-on with the rule of law. Strip away the noise and forget the spin for a moment. This was not a theatrical clash. This was not a man venting frustration. This was a president under direct judicial pressure, responding the way authoritarians always do when institutions stop bending, with intimidation. Donald Trump walked into a courtroom he did not need to be in. That decision alone mattered. This was a procedural hearing tied to a financial investigation, one governed by written motions and appellate standards. Defendants with disciplined legal strategy stay away. Trump didn't. He wanted proximity to power. He wanted the optics of confrontation. He wanted to dominate the room. And when it became clear the judge was not going to yield, when the deposition order remained intact, something snapped. Witnesses described the shift as visceral. The cadence changed. The volume rose. Interruptions turned into accusations. Accusations turned into threats. The judge warned him, then warned him again, then did something federal judges almost never do in cases touching the presidency. He ejected Trump's legal team from the courtroom. Pause there. That is not a procedural footnote. That is a constitutional flare shot into the sky. A president so disruptive, so unwilling to submit to basic courtroom decorum, that the court removed his own lawyers to preserve order. The symbolism is devastating. The chief executive of the United States, left alone, stripped of counsel, silenced by the bench, still visibly seething. This is where the story stops being about temperament and starts being about danger. Judges do not remove counsel lightly. It invites appeal. It creates record. It signals breakdown. And here, it documented something far more corrosive than a bad day in court. A president attempting to overpower the judiciary through fear and spectacle. Within hours, impeachment articles began moving. Not whispered, not leaked, filed. The speed wasn't opportunism, it was preparedness. Lawmakers had been waiting for conduct that crossed from political defiance into institutional threat. They got it in real time, under oath, with witnesses. The allegations are precise for a reason: judicial intimidation, abuse of power, incitement through rhetoric signaling resistance to lawful arrest. This is not abstract theory. It is behavior anchored in public record, courtroom testimony, written orders, and the president's own statements declaring he would not submit to law enforcement. This is where Trump's defenders try to blur the line. They want to recast intimidation as passion, defiance as patriotism, threats as metaphor. But federal law does not grade on a curve for presidents. Threatening a judge is not speech. It is potential obstruction. It is the kind of conduct that gets ordinary defendants jailed before sunset. And here's the part that matters most. Trump wasn't a private citizen lashing out. He was the head of the executive branch, constitutionally bound to execute the law, not terrorize those tasked with interpreting it. When a president treats the judiciary as an enemy to be cowed rather than a co-equal branch to be respected, the entire constitutional structure begins to wobble. Zoom out, because this is not isolated. This is pattern. Trump has spent years testing how far he can push institutions before they break. Inspectors general fired, prosecutors smeared, judges attacked by name, law enforcement branded as traitors. Every time the system absorbed the blow, he escalated. What we saw in that courtroom was escalation made physical. History has a name for this phase. It's the moment when leaders stop pretending the law applies to them and start daring the system to stop them. From Orban to Erdogan, the script is consistent. Delegitimize courts, frame accountability as persecution, mobilize supporters against legal authority, then claim victimhood when consequences appear. The United States has safeguards those countries lacked, but safeguards only work if people enforce them. Legally, the implications are severe. Judicial intimidation undermines due process by contaminating proceedings. It chills witnesses. It pressures judges. It signals to supporters that courts are fair game. When paired with public statements about resisting arrest, it edges into incitement territory that prosecutors take very seriously, especially given recent American history. Constitutionally, this brushes against the core of separation of powers. Article 2 gives the president power, not immunity. Article 3 gives courts independence precisely so they cannot be bullied by transient political force. When a president challenges that balance through threat rather than appeal, Congress is not just permitted to respond, it is obligated. This is why impeachment exists, not as a punishment for unpopular policy, but as a circuit breaker for conduct that endangers the constitutional order. Politically, the shockwaves are already visible. Republican lawmakers understand something their base rhetoric cannot erase. Defending tax policy is easy. Defending a president threatening a judge is not. Swing districts are allergic to chaos. Independent voters recoil from instability. And courts, unlike rallies, do not care about loyalty. Trump himself seems to grasp this on some level. The panic witnesses described was not theatrical. It was the look of someone realizing that bravado does not work in rooms governed by law. The deposition clock is still ticking. Appeals courts are still watching. Every judge handling his future cases now has a documented incident demonstrating hostility to judicial authority. That matters. Judges are human, but institutions are not naive. Patterns inform decisions. Defiance hardens resolve. Trump may have thought intimidation would slow the machine. It may have accelerated it. And then there is the precedent question, the one that outlives Trump entirely. If a president can threaten a judge in open court without consequence, future presidents will notice. If intimidation works once, it becomes a tool. That is how republics rot quietly, not with coups, but with tolerated misconduct that shifts norms one incident at a time. This is the climax, whether people want to admit it or not. A presidency already weighed down by legal exposure is now colliding directly with constitutional enforcement. The fire is no longer theoretical. It is burning in public view. What happens next will define far more than Trump's term. It will define whether the judiciary remains a co-equal branch or becomes a suggestion, whether impeachment remains a safeguard or a dead letter, whether law is something presidents obey or something they dare. History will not be confused about this moment. The only question is whether the public understands it while it is still unfolding. If you care about seeing the warning signs before the damage is irreversible, don't look away now. Stay alert, pay attention, because the most dangerous moments are the ones that feel chaotic while they're happening and obvious only after they're over.